Have you ever looked at a quiet, unassuming person and made a snap judgment only to discover they were holding a secret that could shake your entire world? What happens when a monstrously arrogant man, a so-called master, decides to publicly humiliate a modest, single mother just for a laugh? You are about to witness a story that will leave you breathless, a moment when the quietest voice in the room becomes the most terrifying roar. What this woman does next will not only leave an entire building in stunned silence, it will redefine your understanding of strength, dignity, and justice. Before we dive in, do us a huge favor and smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell, because you will not want to miss the fallout from this explosive confrontation. And let us know in the comments below, have you ever been completely wrong about someone? This story might make you think twice about ever judging a book by its cover again. The heavy glass door of the Dragon's Fang dojo swung inward with a whisper of displaced air, and Amelia Vance stepped inside. For anyone watching, she was just another parent swallowed by the cavernous space. The air was a familiar, pungent cocktail, the sharp tang of sweat, the earthy scent of herbal balms used for bruised muscles, and an almost electric undercurrent of raw, disciplined aggression. Every Thursday, Amelia walked through this door to pick up her 16-year-old daughter, Chloe, and every time she felt the same strange alchemy of profound comfort and a deeply buried instinctual readiness. The training hall, or dojang, was a vast expanse of royal blue mats under the sterile, unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights. It was a world of sharp staccato sounds, the percussive thwack of feet striking pads, the synchronized hiss of breath expelled with each powerful strike, and the echoing bark of commands from the instructors. Amelia's eyes, soft and gentle, immediately scanned the sea of white uniforms, or GIs, and found her daughter. Chloe was a study in fierce concentration, her face set in a serious mask as she flowed through a complex poomsae, a sequence of defensive and offensive techniques. Her dark ponytail whipped through the air, her eyes shining with a passion that made Amelia's heart swell with a quiet, fierce pride. "Mom!" Chloe's voice, bright and breathless, cut through the noise as she spotted her. She waved a wide, radiant grin splitting her face, her cheeks flushed with the rosy glow of exertion. Amelia smiled back, a gentle, unassuming expression that perfectly matched her appearance. At 42, she was the epitome of modest. No makeup adorned her face, and streaks of premature silver threaded through the dark, curly hair she always pulled back in a simple, no-fuss ponytail. Her faded, soft gray t-shirt and well-worn sweatpants were a uniform of invisibility, designed to blend in with the row of parents lining the benches along the wall. "Take your time, sweetie," she called out, her voice soft, waving Chloe back to her practice. She settled onto a hard wooden bench, pulling out her phone to idly scroll through work emails. But her attention wasn't on the screen. It was on her daughter. She watched how this place, this discipline, had forged a new confidence in the once shy girl, hammering out her insecurities and replacing them with a core of tempered steel. It was why she paid the exorbitant monthly fees without complaint. Suddenly a voice, sharp and laced with derision, sliced through the hall. "Higher, Ramirez. Your grandmother kicks higher than that. Am I running a daycare for broken dolls here?" Amelia's head snapped up. In the center of the advanced students' circle stood Damian Cross. He was the dojo's head instructor, a physically imposing figure whose pristine white GI seemed to glow under the lights. His black belt, tied with meticulous precision, was a stark symbol of his authority. He moved with the fluid grace of a predator, and pride radiated from him like heat off asphalt. But beneath that pride, Amelia saw something else, something ugly, She recognized instantly a festering impatience that only ever surfaced when he was dealing with the students of color. A few of the white students beside the boy, Ramirez, snickered. Amelia saw the boy's shoulders slump, the light in his eyes dimming as he bowed his head, shame washing over his face. He tried the kick again, but the joy, the fire, was gone. A knot of familiar discomfort tightened in Amelia's chest. This wasn't the first time she had witnessed Damien's quiet poison. He was clever. He never used overtly racist language. He didn't have to. It was in his tone a mocking lilt reserved only for some. It was in his gaze a dismissive flick of the eyes. It was in the way he would spend 10 minutes lavishing praise on a white student for a mediocre move only to verbally dismantle a black or Latino student for a near-perfect execution. Other white parents, she noticed, would shrug it off as tough love. But Amelia and the other parents of color, they knew what it was. They felt the sting of it as if it were a physical blow. Beside her, a mother leaned toward another and whispered, "Coach Cross is so intense, but I guess that's why his students win all the competitions." The other mother hesitated, her voice low. "Maybe, but my son Kevin says he feels like he's always being watched, always waiting for the criticism while the other kids just get to learn." Amelia listened in silence, her heart aching with a weary rage. She knew this world. She knew how prejudice festered in the quiet corners, in the unspoken assumptions, and the unequal applications of grace. Chloe, bless her resilient heart, never complained, but Amelia had seen the shadow of Damien's slights cross her daughter's face more times than she could count. A resolve hard and cold began to form in the pit of her stomach. She was a woman who despised confrontation, who had built a life around quiet observation. But a line was being approached. A line she had sworn to herself she would never let anyone cross again. "Mama, I'm done." Chloe's voice, miraculously still cheerful, broke through her mother's dark thoughts. She jogged over, sweat beading on her brow, her GI sticking to her skin. But her smile was as bright as ever. "You did great, honey," Amelia said warmly, her voice a soft caress, as she reached out and brushed a stray, damp curl from Chloe's forehead. "Let's get you home. I'm making your favorite lasagna." As Chloe wrapped an arm around her mother's, bubbling with talk about the upcoming Greenbelt test, Amelia felt a pair of eyes on them. She didn't have to turn to know whose they were. It was Damien. She could feel the weight of his stare, the sheer disdain dripping from it. It was a look that dismissed them both as insignificant, a faint mocking smile that questioned their very right to be in his sacred space. Amelia took a deep, steadying breath. She squared her shoulders and walked her daughter out of the dojo, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But she was a fool to think that was the end of it. She had no idea that a different kind of match, one of justice, honor, and a long-buried past, was about to begin. And that she was about to be challenged in a way that would force her to unleash a storm no one, least of all Damien Cross, could ever have seen coming. Have you ever seen a situation like this? A teacher or a coach with a clear bias? How did it make you feel? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're already feeling the tension, you better be subscribed, because the moment of reckoning is coming, and it's going to be brutal. Amelia arrived at the next practice earlier than usual, a silent promise to herself, solidifying into a plan. She wasn't just a parent picking up her child today. She was an observer on a mission. She found a discreet seat in the back corner, a shadow among shadows, and watched. She needed to see it all unfiltered to confirm the ugliness she knew was there. The class began with its usual kinetic energy. Shouts of "Ki Hap" echoed off the walls. But through the whirlwind of activity, Amelia's focus was laser-sharp on one man. Damian Cross, a walking god in his own mind, patrolled the mats. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over the young students, but they lingered longer and harder on the brown faces. "Jackson again." Damian's voice cracked like a whip, freezing a small black boy in his tracks. "Your stance is pathetic. Do you want to be here? Or do you want to go home and cry to your mommy?" The boy's lower lip trembled, his eyes filling with tears of humiliation. Right beside him, a white student named Evan executed the same move with even less precision, stumbling slightly. Damian simply placed a gentle hand on Evan's shoulder. "Easy does it, son. It takes time. You've got the spirit for it. You'll get there." A wave of pure, hot indignation washed over Amelia. The favoritism was so blatant, so shamelessly on display, it was breathtaking. Around her, the murmurs began. The white mothers nearby saw a dedicated tough-as-nails coach pushing his students to be their best. Some even nodded approvingly. They didn't see the cruelty because it wasn't aimed at their children. Their children were being praised, encouraged, nurtured. In another corner, a different conversation was happening in hushed, pained tones. Marissa Jackson's mother sat ramrod straight, her face a mask of anguish as she watched her son be systematically broken down. Yet she said nothing. Amelia understood her silence. The fear of being labeled a troublemaker, of making things worse for your child, was a powerful anesthetic. Then it came. "Enough, Chloe." The shout was so sudden, so vicious, it made Amelia physically jolt. What was that pathetic excuse for a sidekick? Do you seriously expect to test for your green belt next month with that garbage? Amelia watched as her daughter froze her eyes wide with shock at the instructor she had worked so desperately hard to impress. The bright enthusiasm on Chloe's face flickered and died, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching disappointment. But Chloe was a fighter. She summoned her courage, nodded stiffly, and threw the kick again. Amelia felt her own hands clench into fists, her fingernails digging into her palms. Her maternal instinct screamed at her to rise to stride onto that mat and stand between her daughter and that venomous man. But a lifetime of discipline held her back. "She has to learn to handle this," a part of her argued. "The world is full of men like Damian. She has to be strong." But another part, a much older, more dangerous part, whispered, "No. The world is full of men like Damian, because people let them be." When the class finally ended, Chloe collected her gear in a cloud of silence. The usual post-practice spark was gone. Amelia walked over and wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders, pulling her into a fierce, protective hug. It was a wordless message of love and solidarity, an attempt to pour her own strength into Chloe's flagging spirit. As they turned to leave, Amelia's eyes met Damian's across the room. There was no mistaking it this time. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. He smirked, a slow, deliberate expression of mockery, as if to say, "Yeah, I tore your kid down. What are you going to do about it?" Amelia met his gaze, her own expression a placid, unreadable mask. There was no fear in her eyes, only a deep, chilling calm. In that moment, she vowed that her silence was over. She would take action. Not just for Chloe, for Jackson, for Ramirez, for Kevin, and for every child who had ever had their light dimmed by the casual cruelty of a petty tyrant. This time, she would not be just a quiet observer. This time, she would be the storm. The next practice, the air in the dojo was different, thicker, charged with anticipation. Damian had a glint in his eye, the look of a man who had orchestrated an event. "Everyone gather round," he commanded, his voice booming. "Circle up, parents, come closer. You'll want to see this." Students and parents formed a large, curious ring around the central mat. Damien stood in the middle, a showman in his element. "Hello, everyone," he began, a smug smile playing on his lips. "Today I want to try something educational. I want to demonstrate in a very clear way the vast difference between a professionally trained martial artist and a lay person, the difference between real discipline and wishful thinking." He paused, his eyes sweeping the circle, a predator scanning the herd for the weakest member. And then his gaze locked onto Amelia. It was a physical, palpable connection. A mocking, triumphant smile curled his lips as he pointed a single accusatory finger directly at her. "And I believe we have the perfect volunteer, Ms. Vance, Chloe's mother. Always so diligent in bringing her daughter, but I'd be willing to bet she's never thrown a proper punch in her entire life. Am I right?" A few students. Damien's sycophants snickered nervously. The laughter died quickly, however, as everyone turned to look at the quiet woman who had just been thrust into the spotlight. The dojo fell into a dead, profound silence. Chloe, standing beside her mother, flushed a deep, painful red. Her small hand trembled as she clutched at Amelia's sleeve. "Mom, please," she whispered, her voice a cocktail of embarrassment and terror. "Don't." Damien took a few swaggering steps closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, don't you worry, Chloe. I promise I'll be gentle with your mommy. This is just an educational exercise. I'm going to show her and all of you precisely why martial arts isn't for everyone, especially not for, well, for people like her." The unspoken words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Weak people. Black people. Women. Amelia's eyes narrowed. The fury that had been smoldering in her chest for weeks ignited into a full-blown inferno. But on the surface, she remained as still as a frozen lake. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I don't think this is necessary. I'm simply here for my daughter." Damien laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Of course, Ms. Vance. But I thought it would be a powerful lesson for the students. A little dose of reality." Several of the white parents nodded, seeing nothing but a clever teaching moment. Across the mat, the parents of color sat in stony silence, their faces masks of outrage, but none dared to intervene. Amelia felt the burning stares of pity and curiosity from every direction. She saw the absolute agony of humiliation in her daughter's eyes. And in that instant, she knew she had no choice. She could no longer be the silent witness. Not in front of her child. She took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and met Damien's arrogant gaze. Her voice, when it came, was not loud, but it rang through the silent dojo with the clarity of a bell. "All right, Mr. Cross. If you're so intent on proving a point, I won't back down. But perhaps you should prepare yourself for the possibility that not everyone is as weak as you seem to believe." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Students and parents alike stared at the woman they had written off as meek and timid. Even Damien was momentarily taken aback. Then he threw his head back and roared with laughter, a booming, arrogant sound. But behind the bravado, Amelia saw a flicker of something else in his eyes, a challenge accepted, and a touch of unease. "Oh, really?" he sneered. "I hope you know what you're getting yourself into, Ms. Vance. You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself and your daughter any more than you already have, would you?" Amelia didn't rise to the bait. She simply turned to Chloe, placing a firm, reassuring hand on her daughter's trembling shoulder. "It's okay, honey. Mommy knows what she's doing." Chloe looked up into her mother's eyes, and in their depths she saw a strength she had never seen before, a dangerous, unshakable strength. She nodded, her fear still present, but now mingled with a spark of awe. Damien, puffing out his chest, addressed the crowd. "All right, everyone, get ready for a show you'll never forget. After today, you will all understand where true power lies and why an amateur will always be just an amateur." Amelia squeezed Chloe's hand one last time, a quiet fire of righteous purpose burning in her heart. The physical match had not yet begun, but the real fight, the fight for dignity, for respect, and for justice, had been raging for a very long time. And it was about to reach its devastating conclusion. The challenge hung in the air, thick and volatile. Amelia met Damien's condescending gaze with an unnerving stillness. This quiet composure seemed to bother him more than any verbal protest could have. "Ms. Vance, what is it? Second thoughts already," he taunted, stepping closer. "Realizing it's one thing to have fantasies in your head and another to face a real black belt." The small pockets of snickering from his favored students started again. Chloe flinched beside her, and that was the final catalyst. Amelia gently put a hand on Chloe's shoulder, a silent promise, before taking a step forward. Her eyes were calm, but they held a new, hard intensity. "Mr. Cross," she began, her voice soft, but carrying to every corner of the hushed dojo. "If we are going to do this, I have one condition." Damien threw his head back and laughed, a genuine mocking bark of amusement. "A condition? This gets better and better. By all means, enlighten us. What condition could you possibly propose?" Amelia ignored his theatrics. She drew a slow, deliberate breath, and when she spoke, every word was precisely enunciated. "If you win, I will publicly admit that you are correct, and I know nothing of martial arts. I will leave this dojo and never return." The crowd murmured. This was more than they expected. "But," she continued, her voice gaining an edge of steel, her eyes locking onto his, "if you lose, you will stand in the center of this mat in front of every student and every parent, and you will publicly apologize for your disrespectful and racist behavior." The words landed like a detonation. The dojo was plunged into a shocked, absolute silence. You could hear a pin drop. The white parents who had been chuckling now stared, their mouths slightly agape. Disbelief warred with indignation on their faces. The parents of color, however, exchanged wide-eyed, hopeful glances. Finally, someone was naming the monster. Damien froze, the smug smirk wiped clean from his face for a full 2 seconds. Then he forced a laugh, but it was brittle, harsh. His eyes, however, drilled into her, searching for a bluff. "Apologize," he spat. "You're actually delusional enough to think you can beat me. Are you serious?" Amelia's expression remained utterly impassive. "Perfectly serious," she replied. "If you are as confident as you claim, then my condition should pose no problem for you whatsoever. Unless you think there's a chance you might lose." It was a masterful trap, and he walked right into it. She had questioned his dominance, the very core of his identity. Discomfort flickered in his eyes, quickly masked by another wave of bravado. He threw his arms out wide, playing to his audience. "Fine, I accept. If I lose, which, let's be clear, is an impossibility, I will apologize for. Whatever fantasy grievances you've concocted. But Ms. Vance, you had better prepare a very pretty speech because you're going to need it when I'm done with you." The approval from his loyalists was immediate. They clapped and cheered, confident in their champion's inevitable victory. Across the room, Marissa Jackson's mother clasped her hands together in a silent prayer, her face a storm of hope and fear. Chloe looked up at her mother, her face pale. "Mom, are you sure?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "You don't have to." Amelia knelt, bringing her face level with her daughter's. She looked deep into Chloe's worried eyes. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice a low, steady anchor. "Sometimes the only way to deal with a bully is to stand up to them. I'll be fine, and I am doing the right thing. Do you trust me?" Chloe studied her mother's face, the unwavering resolve, the deep hidden strength, and felt that strange sense of awe again. She took a shaky breath and gave a small, firm nod. "The match will take place tomorrow, right here." Damien boomed, his confidence roaring back to life. "Make sure you're all here to see it. I guarantee this will be the most unforgettable demonstration this dojo has ever witnessed." He was right about one thing. It would be unforgettable, but not for the reasons he imagined. A righteous fire was now blazing in Amelia's soul. This was no longer a sparring match. This was an exorcism, and she was about to banish a demon. That night, Amelia Vance sat in the dark of her own living room. The city hummed its nocturnal lullaby outside her window, but she didn't hear it. Chloe was fast asleep, but for Amelia, sleep was a distant country she had no hope of visiting. Damien's taunts had done more than just provoke her. They had unearthed a ghost. They had unlocked a room in her past she had sealed shut with pain and sorrow 15 years ago. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to even think the name. The Phantom. A name that had once been whispered with a mixture of fear and awe in the brutal, sweat-soaked arenas of the global MMA circuit. Before she was Amelia Vance, single mother and paralegal, she was Alani the Phantom Williams, 3-time undefeated women's welterweight world champion. In the cage, she was known for her chilling calm, her supernatural-seeming defense, and a ruthlessly efficient, almost surgical counter-striking style. Opponents spoke of a cold spot in the ring, a pocket of dead air that seemed to surround her, crushing their spirit before a single punch was thrown. But now, all that glory felt like a story about someone else, a painful melodrama she'd deliberately forgotten. She closed her eyes, fighting the wave of memories. The final image she had of that life wasn't the roar of a crowd or the heavy gold-plated belt around her waist. It was the night of the deluge. The night before the biggest title defense of her career. The night her younger brother Leo, her biggest fan, and the brightest light in her life, called her. "I'm on my way, Lonnie. Got the best seats in the house. You're gonna knock her out, I know it." The joy in his voice was the last thing she ever heard from him. He never made it to the arena. A drunk driver on the rain-slicked highway extinguished his life in a cataclysm of twisted metal and shattered glass. When the news reached her in the locker room, the world stopped. Her strength, her will, her famous phantom-like composure, it all evaporated into an ocean of grief. She forfeited the match. She refused condolences. All that remained was an infinite howling void, and a guilt so profound it felt like a physical weight on her soul. After the funeral, she vanished. The Phantom retired, abandoning her career, despite the desperate pleas of her coaches, sponsors, and fans. She couldn't stand the sight of the ring, a place so entwined with the last moments of her brother's life. She changed her name from Williams to Vance, moved 1,000 miles away, and became Amelia, an ordinary woman whose only mission was to build a quiet, safe life for her daughter, far from the shadows of her past. But tonight, Damien Cross had desecrated that peace. He had awakened the Phantom. Amelia's eyes snapped open, a new hard light in them. Hiding was no longer an option. This was for Chloe. This was for Jackson and all the others. But most of all, this was for Leo. She rose from the chair and walked to an old cedar chest in the corner of the room. She opened the lid. Beneath layers of old blankets lay her championship belt, the silver plates tarnished with age, and a single faded photograph of her and a beaming 19-year-old Leo his arms slung around her shoulders. She lifted the belt, its familiar weight a shock to her system. Her fingertips traced the scratches and dents, each one a memory of a brutal war. Leo's face swam before her eyes. "You gonna knock her out, Lonnie?" "I'm sorry I ran, Leo," she whispered to the ghost in the room, her voice trembling with a fresh, fiery resolve. "I'm so sorry I let them dim my light. But I promise you, I won't run anymore. This one's for you. It's for the justice you always believed in." She placed the belt back in the chest and closed the lid with a quiet finality. Her posture had changed. Her eyes had transformed. The quiet mother was gone. The woman standing in the dark living room was Alani Williams. The phantom had returned from the shadows, and she had come to collect a debt. The next afternoon, the dojo was packed to the gills. It seemed the entire community had turned out drawn by the irresistible promise of drama. A palpable electric tension filled the air as Amelia Vance stepped onto the mat. She wore the same simple sweats and t-shirt, her hair pulled back in its usual ponytail. Her face was a mask of serene composure. Damien was already in the center of the ring, preening for the crowd. "Welcome, everyone," he boomed, a confident smirk plastered across his face. "As promised, a demonstration of real skill versus, well, you see." He gestured dismissively toward Amelia. "Ms. Vance, are you ready, or do you wish to concede now and save us all some time?" Amelia simply met his gaze and gave a single curt nod. "All right then," Damien crowed. "I promise to be gentle, a gentleman's honor," when he slid into a textbook fighting stance and began his performance. It was a show of flash and flare. High spinning kicks that whistled through the air, stopping a hair's breadth from Amelia's head. Intricate hand-striking combinations that blurred with speed. A few of the parents, the ones in his corner, applauded politely. Others just stared, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity on their faces. Chloe watched from the edge of the mat, her hands clenched into tiny fists, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Amelia did not move. Not in the way he expected. As he unleashed his barrage of controlled strikes, she simply evaded. It was uncanny. She didn't leap or duck wildly. She made tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in weight. A slight turn of the shoulder, a half step back, a subtle dip of the head. His feet and fists sliced through empty air, missing her by millimeters. His confident grin began to falter. Her calm was more than just composure. It felt like a silent, profound mockery of his skill. "Are you going to fight back?" He snapped his next kick, coming a little faster, a little closer, genuine force behind it this time. Amelia's voice, when it came, was quiet, but it cut through the room. "I was told this was a demonstration by a professional. I am simply waiting for you to demonstrate something worthwhile." A collective intake of breath swept through the crowd. Damien's face flushed a deep, ugly red. The sheer audacity of her taunt, delivered with such unnerving calm, had thrown him completely off balance. "If you're so confident, Ms. Vance," he snarled, "then perhaps I don't need to hold back anymore." His next assault was no longer a performance. It was an attack. The strikes came faster, harder, fueled by a rage he was no longer trying to conceal. And yet the result was the same. Amelia flowed around his offense like water around a stone. She was a ghost, a phantom, always exactly where his strikes were not. The mood in the crowd was shifting. The pity was evaporating, replaced by a growing sense of bewildered amazement. How is she doing that?" a parent whispered, eyes wide. "She has to have training," another murmured. No one can move like that by accident. The students of color who had been watching with pained anxiety now had a flicker of hope in their eyes. They saw their tormentor, the unbeatable master, being made a fool of, and without a single punch being thrown against him. "You think dodging is winning?" Damien seethed, his breathing now ragged, his GI stained with sweat. Frustration had made his perfect technique sloppy. Amelia did not reply. She simply held his gaze, her own eyes as cold and deep as a winter lake. She knew he was reaching his breaking point. She knew the time for defense was almost over. This wasn't just sparring. This was a deconstruction. She was taking him apart, piece by arrogant piece, in front of the very people he used to build his pedestal. The air in the dojo was so thick with tension it was a wonder no one suffocated. It was a silence born of disbelief. Damien Cross, a man who moved with the deadly grace of a panther, was now panting, flailing like a drunk, and his opponent hadn't even thrown a single punch. His rage had boiled over, and with it, his discipline had completely dissolved. His precise, elegant kicks had become wild, furious lunges. Rebecca, now Alani, in all but name, remained the calm eye of his hurricane. Her movements were a masterclass in economy and efficiency. A half-second before his fist would arrive, she would have already shifted her center of gravity an inch to the right, letting the blow rocket past her cheek. As his leg swept towards her ribs, she would glide back just enough for his foot to meet only empty air. It was a supernatural display of timing and perception. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, more insistent. "This is impossible," a white father, one of Damien's biggest supporters, said to his wife. "She's not even breaking a sweat." Across the mat, Marissa Jackson's mother was now on her feet, her hands clasped over her mouth, tears of sheer, vindicated joy streaming down her face. She wasn't watching a fight. She was watching a divine intervention. "What is this game you're playing?" Damien screamed, his voice raw with fury and a creeping primal fear. "Are you a witch? Fight me. Fight me, you coward." For the first time, Alani spoke again. Her voice was still quiet, but it now carried the chilling authority of a judge delivering a sentence. "You wanted a demonstration of skill, Mr. Cross. My skill is that I do not need to hurt you to defeat you. Your anger is doing that for me." That was it, the final psychic blow. He was being beaten by his own rage. It was the ultimate humiliation for a martial artist. Sensing the last vestiges of his control slipping, Damien let out a guttural roar and charged, throwing all his weight into his signature move, a devastating, flying, spinning heel kick. It was a showstopper, a move of immense power and risk designed to obliterate an opponent. He launched himself into the air, his body a spinning vortex of white cotton and black fury. The crowd gasped. This was it. There was no dodging this. But Alani didn't dodge. As his heel sliced through the air, aimed directly at her head, she moved. It wasn't a retreat. It was an advance. In one fluid, shockingly simple motion, she stepped into his attack, slipping under the arc of his kick. As his leg passed harmlessly over her shoulder, she didn't strike. She simply extended one open hand and placed it gently, almost casually, on his planted standing leg, just behind the knee. It was not a push. It was not a trip. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible disruption of his entire kinetic chain. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. With his balance point surgically removed, Damien's body, still carrying the massive rotational momentum of the kick, had nowhere to go. He tumbled out of the air like a bird shot from the sky, spinning awkwardly before crashing to the mat in a graceless, sprawling heap. The thud of his body hitting the floor was the only sound in a world that had gone utterly, profoundly silent. No one moved. No one breathed. For a full 10 seconds, the dojo was a frozen tableau of shock. Damien lay on his back, eyes wide with horror, the air knocked from his lungs. He stared up at the fluorescent lights, his mind unable to process the sequence of events. He hadn't been hit. He hadn't been thrown. He had simply fallen, defeated by a touch. And then a single, clear, trembling voice cut through the silence. "That's my mom," Chloe said, tears streaming down her face, but her voice was filled with a pride so immense it was heartbreaking. "She's the Phantom." Whispers erupted. "The Phantom? What does she mean?" Someone in the back, a younger parent, frantically typed on his phone. His eyes widened. "Oh my God," he breathed loud enough for those around him to hear. "She's Alani Williams, the MMA champion, 3-time undefeated world champion." The whispers turned into a roar of disbelief. Phones came out across the room. Screens lit up with old fight footage, with pictures of a younger, fiercer Amelia holding a massive gold belt aloft. The truth descended upon the dojo like a physical force. The woman they had pitied, the meek little mother, was a legend, a titan of combat sports who had walked away at the height of her power. Damien pushed himself up onto his elbows, his face a ghostly white. The pieces clicked into place in his mind, and the full, crushing weight of his arrogance came crashing down on him. He hadn't challenged a random parent. He had challenged a ghost from the pantheon of fighting gods. He hadn't just lost a match. He had been utterly, systematically, and publicly dismantled by a master. And then from the cluster of students of color, a single tentative clap. Then another. Then another. It swelled into a thunderous, defiant ovation, not for a fighter, but for a liberator. They were cheering for the woman who had slain their dragon. Alani stood over the fallen Damien, her expression not one of triumph, but of a sad, solemn gravity. She looked down at him, a fallen king in his own shattered kingdom, and in that moment, she was not a fighter. She was a teacher, and the final, most painful lesson was about to be delivered. In the ringing silence that followed the eruption of applause, Damien Cross slowly, shakily pushed himself to his feet. Every ounce of his swagger, his pride, his very identity had been stripped away, leaving behind a hollowed-out man drowning in humiliation. He wouldn't meet Amelia's eyes. He couldn't. Amelia walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. "Do you understand now, Mr. Cross?" She asked, her voice devoid of malice, filled only with a weary clarity. "True mastery isn't about the power to dominate. It's about the discipline to control oneself. It's about respect, a principle you discarded." The students, his students, were all looking at him, but the fear was gone from their eyes. In its place was something far worse, pity. Damien finally lifted his head, and what everyone saw was a broken man. His voice was a choked rasp. "I am sorry." He didn't just say it to her. He said it to the room, to Jackson, to Chloe, to Marissa. His eyes scanned the faces he had belittled for so long. "I was wrong. My pride, my prejudice, I am sorry." It was the confession of a man who had just seen his own soul in a shattered mirror and was horrified by what he saw. Marissa Jackson's mother stepped forward, her face streaked with tears. "Thank you, Amelia," she said, her voice trembling. "You gave our children their dignity back today." "No," Amelia replied, her gaze softening as she looked at the circle of hopeful young faces. "I just reminded them they never lost it. No one can take your dignity. You can only give it away by being silent in the face of injustice. She turned back to Damien. Your apology is a start, she said. But real change is proven through action, not words. The way you teach, the way you treat every single person who walks through that door, that will be your true apology. From that day forward, the Dragon's Fang Dojo was transformed. The story of the day the Phantom came became a local legend, a cautionary tale about hubris and a testament to quiet strength. Damien Cross, humbled to his very core, embarked on a slow, painful, but sincere journey of redemption. He fired the sycophantic junior instructors who had enabled his worst tendencies. He reached out to community leaders seeking education on cultural sensitivity. He changed his teaching method, replacing fear-based intimidation with encouragement and a focus on the true tenets of martial arts: respect, humility, and honor. Amelia never fought again. She didn't need to. Her point had been made. She became a silent partner at the dojo, a revered mentor. The students called Kwanjangnim Grandmaster. She would sit on the same bench watching Chloe train, but now students of all races and backgrounds would approach her not with fear, but with reverence, asking for her quiet wisdom. The dojo flourished, not just winning trophies, but becoming a true sanctuary, a place where strength was measured not by the color of one's belt, but by the content of their character. One evening, as they were leaving, Chloe squeezed her mother's hand. You know, she said, a thoughtful smile on her face, the scariest thing about you isn't that you're the Phantom. Amelia looked at her intrigued. Oh, what is it then? It's how you can be the Phantom, Chloe said, her voice full of awe. And still be my mom who makes the best lasagna in the world. That's the real superpower. Amelia laughed, a full, warm sound that filled the quiet evening air. She pulled her daughter into a hug. She had come to this place seeking a shield for her daughter and had ended up reforging a sword for an entire community. The greatest victories she had learned are not won in the cage or on the mat. They are won in the heart, in the quiet, resolute decision to stand up and say, no more, reminding the world that even the most unassuming person can be a force of nature, and that the quietest storms are often the most powerful. What does true strength mean to you? Is it the power to overpower others, or the courage to uplift them? Share your thoughts with our community in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please honor Amelia's legacy by sharing it with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner power. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge our perspectives and inspire us to be better. Thank you for watching. And remember, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about.